Well, President Duque, this is an enormous honor for me to be able to actually get to ask you some very important questions as you look back on your administration. Not only that, you've been a huge supporter and a dear, dear friend of me personally and of the organization, and for that we will always thank you. And I hope to see you often in your new role.
Well, you'll see me more often. It's a pleasure to be here, so thank you so much.
So let's really focus on 3 or 4 different topics. The first one is climate change. That was really one of your main priorities for your administration, and you set a really ambitious agenda, such as increasing its renewable energy generation and protecting rainforests. But as you know, climate change knows no borders. And so while you may be working and taking action, there are other countries that also touch the Amazon and care about climate change. So can you talk a little bit about how you see the coordination within Latin America on climate change, and particularly related to the Amazon?
Well, thank you so much, Susan, and thank you so much for that question. It is a great honor for me to be here at the CEO Summit of the Americas. So for a long time, there was this phrase that was used by Kenichi Omae, where he said, you have to think globally and you have to act locally. Well, I think you have to act globally and you have to act locally. And that's why the strategy that we have put together in Colombia is not only focused on our behavior inside our country, but also how much we can contribute to the climate action that is needed worldwide. So why Colombia, Susan? Colombia only represents something close to 0.6% of all the world's CO2 emissions. But we're one of the most affected countries by climate change. So we said, we have to make big decisions and set big goals. We said we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, reduce our carbon footprint by 51% in 2030, but we made some policies available and possible within a very short period of time. Today, we have been able to pass from 28 megawatts of installed capacity of non-conventional renewables to be having by the end of the year 2,800 megawatts of installed capacity, which is 100 times what we had at the beginning of the administration. And we have 4,500 more that will be put in place in the next 2 years. And we have a potential of something close to 40 gigawatts to be installed in the course of the next decade in Colombia. So that's issue number 1. Issue number 2, we launched a green mobility bill in Colombia. And as of today, we already surpassed the objective that we had, that was more than 6,000 vehicles. We have now more than 8,000, and maybe we'll get it by the end of the year with 10,000, but we have now on per capita terms, and also in public transportation fleet and cargo transportation fleet, we have the biggest cargo fleets with electric vehicles. Wow. So that's also a major achievement. And last but not least, another big milestone of our policy has been the protected areas. So we signed the Leaders Pledge for Nature in order that by 2030 we will have 30% of the country declared a protected area. But we decided we're not waiting until 2030. And we said in 2022, we're going to reach that goal, and this is going to happen before the 7th of August. Just on those 3 main policies, the advancements have been spectacular. And last but not least, which I think is also a major milestone, Colombia has committed to the 1 Trillion Trees Initiative with my good friends Mark Benioff, and we launched that at the World Economic Forum 3 years ago. We're going to get to the 180 million trees planted by the end of the year, and we have already planted 126 million, wow, which is also a marvelous outcome in the midst of a pandemic.
And are a lot of those in the protected area?
Yes. Actually, our goal was also to recover something close to 300,000 hectares. But another thing that has happened is that when we think about low carbon production, we committed ourselves to have 100,000 hectares of silvopastures, in order so that the cattle production could have more rotation, less area, and reduce the carbon footprint. as of today, we have reached 158,000 hectares with civil pastures. So we're trying to connect every industry with all these big goals. And as I have said it, if Colombia is taking this path, the countries that have contributed the most to this climate crisis have to follow our lead.
That's great. I mean, that's a real accomplishment and quite unique, and something that should be publicized a lot more than I think it has been globally. So another really important issue, and I can remember the very first time I saw you after you became president, was the orange economy, and bringing, you know, more production, more technology, really push entrepreneurship in the tech sector. And you've accomplished so much, because I see that entrepreneurs have flourished. All these companies have been created. Can you talk about how you see your accomplishments in this space?
I believe that creative industries are as important as any other conventional industry that we used to have in our top of mind. So people who don't regularly know that, for example, the orange economy that involves all the creative sectors is bigger than the mining economy in Colombia, or is even bigger than the coffee economy of Colombia, almost 4% of the Colombian GDP. But it had to be put on the scope in a transversal way that we all consider that this is part of the future. So we created the National Council on the Orange Economy, and we got all the ministers set there under the leadership of the Ministry of Culture. And what has happened in the course of the last 4 years is that Colombia has emerged as a creative power. And maybe the best way to describe it is that we created the certificates for the audiovisual sector. So in the last decade, we used to have an average investment in the audiovisual sector that was something close to $10 to $15 million per year. Mm-hmm. This year, we're going to surpass $380 million.
Wow.
And we're having Hulu, Amazon Prime, Netflix, Apple TV, Amazon Prime, as I already mentioned, they all producing now in Colombia. And we have a 40% rebate for all these productions, which makes Colombia the most competitive market for the audiovisual sector right now in Latin America and the Caribbean. But the nice thing is that 95% of the jobs that are being created right now, based on all this audiovisual development, are local workers, are local jobs.
That's great.
So it means that we not only recovered 100% of the jobs we lost during the pandemic, but today we're having the largest investment ever on the audiovisual sector and in all creative industries.
And training, these are high quality jobs.
Yeah, because with the National Employment Service called SENA in Colombia, we have trained more than 700,000 students with capabilities for the orange economy, whether it's design, whether it's makeup, whether it's production, post-production, edition, and we're creating this sort of new jobs, and those jobs are also being called from abroad.
Right.
So we're seeing now more Colombian talents from the creative economy that has been supporting other industries around the world connected to our orange economy.
But you've also really made it easy for entrepreneurship and for small businesses to be created. Can you talk a little bit about that?
When I ran for office, I said that in order to get more investment, we had to reduce the corporate taxation for small, mediums, and large corporations. And I remember that I got a lot of heat and a lot of attacks from former ministers of finance who said, okay, if you embrace that path, you're going to have larger deficit, you're going to not be a good performer in terms of fiscal policy. But what happened is we got 100% of all the capex that takes place in Colombia is free of VAT tax. So that made a strong reduction. The second thing we said, we're going to discount 50% of the local taxes on your national income tax. So we made another reduction. Then we eliminated the presumptive income tax that we used to have for decades in Colombia. Mm-hmm. With that, we reduced by almost 20% the corporate taxation. And what happened is the economy started growing faster. We ended 2019 growing above the world average. We closed 2019 with the first primary fiscal surplus in 8 years since we had the fiscal rule. And we also made something very important, which was to increase by more than 15% the tax collections. Obviously, in 2020, we passed through the pandemic, but you know what happened? Based on these policies that were set before the pandemic, we got a V-shaped recovery last year. We grew 10.6%. And the first trimester of 2022, we got the best first trimester of this century, growing above 8.5%.
Wow.
So it means that if you build these policies, you bring the investment, and maybe it's good to share this also, that foreign direct investment, not related to oil and gas, in the last 4 years has expanded 196%. So sound taxation makes a strong sense, and I'll finish with this. The digital invoicing in terms of sales in Colombia has expanded tax collection like no other time before.
Absolutely. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So another really hallmark of your administration is Venezuela and how you have treated the Venezuelan migrant. We gave you an award and recognized you for that last October. And I mean, you still have a huge flow of migrants. You have treated them. You've created a card so that they can have jobs and health care. But we still have the root cause of people leaving Venezuela because they don't feel secure in living in the country under the current conditions. Can you talk a little bit about how you see all of these pieces coming?
Well, thank you for that question, Susan. We have to acknowledge that the history between Colombia and Venezuela has a strong roots. And we're brothers, we're Siamese brothers. And we had our first constitution together. And that constitution had an article that was Article 83 that said that foreigners in the Great Colombia, that was 1821, will have the same rights as Colombian citizens. Our current constitution in Article 100 keeps that in mind. And for many years in the 20th century, we had a lot of Colombians that went to Venezuela in times of despair, and they were received with open arms. So we decided since day one of the administration that we had to have an open door policy. And then when we started analyzing that we had 1.8 million migrants in Colombia that were invisible. Right. They could not open a bank account, they could not be in the healthcare system, they could not find a job easily. We said we have to make the boldest move. And we created a temporary protection status for 1.8 million Venezuelan migrants in our country. And so far as we're speaking, we have already given 1,036,000 temporary protection status cards to those migrants so they can be visible, open an account, look for a job, buy a house, and have the possibility to feel full of rights. And we have the next 800,000 who are going to receive those cards in the following weeks. So in my opinion, Susan, this is the most important fraternal policy ever embraced in a country in Latin America and the Caribbean. But my biggest message is that we can't take this for granted, and we just can't feel that this is over, because the main root, the main cause of this is the dictatorship of Nicolás Maduro. And I have been working with the international community as a president, and once I leave office, I will continue to fight for the cause so that there's a return of democracy to Venezuela, because nobody can exchange dictatorship for any good or service. We have to work to the return of democracy.
I can think of no one better to work for the return to democracy than you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
So you've been very vocal recently about the impact of social media on democracy. And I think it would be really interesting for this group if you talked a little bit about that from your perspective.
Well, when people ask me about social media and democracy, I think it has two characteristics. It can be a very useful tool, but it can also be a dangerous weapon. And I say this because algorithm manipulation, post-truth, polarization, and populism with social media can produce a tremendous damage on democracy. Why? Because all you need is a lie, and grow that lie exponentially with algorithm manipulation, and then you make it a true. And that is happening in multiple places around the world. So I strongly believe that we have to look at this seriously. I think there are a lot of autocrats around the world who are enjoying every day when they see that vibrant democracies are being affected by horrible polarization and creating this sense of social media civil wars where people attack each other when they look themselves as enemies. So I believe that the social media companies have to really make the ethical reflection whether they're really contributing to the essence of democracy, which is the right to choose based on sound information, and not the right to choose based on facts manipulation. So that's, I guess, is the major challenge we face. But I think we have to recover the sense of truth, facts, and obviously statistics and evidence. If we let that being destroyed as is happening today, it will become the biggest threat to modern democracy as we know it.
And is this something you're going to work on when you leave office as well?
I have been working on that, and I will continue to work on that because I believe that our societies deserve to have sound debates on ideas. But what is happening is that it's like truth no longer matters. So I remember, for example, I was participating in a debate and people say, well, on social media, they're saying that you have done nothing for the peace process in Colombia. And then we show the evidence. And then they say, all you're showing us is statistics and facts. So it's like, it doesn't matter. We definitely need to put before the discussion the facts. And it is in Colombia, it's in the United States, it's in Canada, it's in the rest of the Americas, and it's also in Europe. We have to recover the essence that democracy shall be based in the right to choose, but the right to choose with sound information, not lies, not manipulation. And what worries me is that when you hear the phrase that says that perception is reality, with social media manipulation, what matters today is the narrative and not the evidence. And I think that has to come to an end.
So we have 1 minute and 20 seconds.
Thank you.
20 seconds left.
Thank you so much.
I want to ask you, in the minute that's left, one last question. As you end your term, which has been just wonderful, generational for the country, your leadership during the pandemic was just notable, outstanding. How do you want to be remembered? What's your legacy?
Well, I had that conversation with my daughter the other day. She's my oldest daughter is 15, and she said, tell me about how do you feel? And I said, well, I had to face the most complicated crisis Colombia has ever suffered. Healthcare crisis, worst recession, migration crisis, and at the same time, continue managing the challenges Colombia has. When I look at the end of the term, and I see that we have gotten a vaccination record of more than 85% of the population, when I see the economy reaching highest growth ever, lowest multidimensional poverty since we started using that indicator, lowest informality rate that Colombia has reached, and being able to expand the social safety net so that 11 million households have the resources to deal with such a crisis, be able to reemerge, and giving to Colombia for the first time in our history free public university education for the poorest of the poor and the emerging middle class, for me, that says the amount of satisfaction. Plus, having 85% of the National Development Plan fulfilled in the midst of a pandemic. And the essence of that plan was to make Colombia a fairer place. Our Gini coefficient was better in 2021 than in 2019. So how do I want to be remembered? As the president who made the biggest social investment ever in Colombian history, based on facts, evidence, but also the improving of life conditions in our country.
Well, with that, we have to end. I want to thank you.
Thank you so much.
I want to thank you for this interview, and I want to thank you for your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you so much.